In these sets of notes, we're going to talk about deductive reasoning and what's different with inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is the process of reasoning logically and drawing a conclusion from given facts and statements. Remember, for inductive reasoning, there were patterns, so this is more with words and just using logic to figure it out. So there's not necessarily a pattern with it. And there's two forms of deductive reasoning. One of them is the law of detachment. And what that is it gives you a conditional statement, and if the hypothesis is true, then the conclusion is always going to be true. So what that would look like in a problem is they would give you one sentence that's a conditional statement, then they will give you another part of a sentence, and if it matches up with the hypotenuse, so the first part of your sentence, and it's true, then we can conclude that our conclusion will be the same conclusion as the original conditional statement. So if you look at number 1 down here, we want to use our deductive reasoning to figure out if there can be a conclusion. If there is, then write it. If not, then we can write no valid conclusion or no conclusion at all. So in this first one, they give us a conditional statement, this first sentence. So if Mark saves $30, and I'm writing that as my P for my hypothesis, so it's Mark saves $30, he can buy a new video game. So there's my Q. Now, so there's my conditional statement, it has nothing to do with the second one. But now if the second sentence, if it starts with the same topic as the hypotenuse or hypothesis, then that means that we can make the same conclusion. So if it says that Mark saves $30, if you notice that that is the same topic as our original hypothesis, then we can make the same conclusion of the first sentence. So we can say that Mark can buy a new video game. And this is probably something that you do want to write down, or the reason why we can make that conclusion. So if the topic from the hypothesis, so if we have the same topic here from the hypothesis of the first sentence, then we can make the same conclusion, and there is the conclusion. In number 3, we're going to do next, we notice it's talking about 18 years old, so there's our first hypothesis. Then they're talking about registering to vote as our conclusion. So we want to check to see if this next part, if it matches the hypothesis or the conclusion or neither, but if it matches the hypothesis, then we can make the same conclusion. So here it is saying that Olivia is not 18 years old. So that is not exactly identical to what our original hypothesis is. So this is really talking about how it's not the hypothesis. So because it's not just a general, the topic saying that she is 18 years old, we cannot make any valid conclusion. Now, one thing you want to think of is this original conditional statement, it does not need to be true. So I could say if it is raining outside, then my face is blue. Well, if my next sentence says that it is raining outside, then you can make the conclusion that my face is blue. So just because the original statement is there does not mean that it has to be true, but you could still make a valid conclusion just based on logic through how you can match up your different sentences. So let's do one more. I want you to answer number 4 yourself and figure out if you can make a valid conclusion. All right, so you should have noticed that here is our P, here is the Q, our conclusion. So the sum of the measures they're talking about, and then they're complementary. So how does the angle J and K match up? Is it the same topic of letter P, or my hypothesis, or is it talking about the complementary? And we can see that the sum of these two angles does measure 90 degrees. So it does match up with our first hypothesis, so you can make a valid conclusion. And your valid conclusion is the same conclusion from the original sentence, the conditional statement. So then those two angles are going to be complementary. This next one is called the law of syllogism. And remember, we don't have to remember the name of it, just the type of deductive reasoning and how it will look in our situation. So it allows us to draw a conclusion from two conditional statements in which the conclusion of the first is the hypothesis of the second. So what that will look like in our symbols is, here's the first statement, so just our P and Q, so our regular hypothesis conclusion. The next part of the first part of our second sentence is going to kind of repeat how the last one ended. So it's going to start with that Q again, so the same topics are going to be repeated there. But then the topic of the last part is just going to be something different, so we're just throwing in a different letter. So we're going to say it's a letter R. So then our conclusion, or therefore, the conclusion we can make is we can tie the original hypothesis with the final conclusion. So we can say if P, then R. That's how we can write our conclusion. So on number 6, if it is Saturday, and I'm going to color code this. So we've got, there's my letter P, then Jake has a baseball tournament, so we're going to say that's our letter Q. Doesn't matter what it is. Okay, so now the second sentence, we have to look at what the topics are. So if Jake has a baseball tournament, if you notice, that's the same exact wording as our top conclusion. So I'm going to do that in the same color because those do match up. And now this last one, then he will need to pack his lunch. So completely different topic, so we're going to call that letter R. And if you notice that the end of the first, the beginning of the sentence, they do pair up. So that means that we can make a valid conclusion, and we're going to pair up the very beginning and the very end. And we're going to make an if-then statement. So if we're going to say, if it is Saturday, then he will need to pack his lunch. And we didn't really have a topic or a subject in there, so you can, instead of writing he will need to pack his lunch, you can write Jake will need to pack his lunch. So on number 9, we're going to move on down to. So on number 9, here we go. So we're going to do our wording and our coloring again. So if it is a sunny weekend, that's going to be my P. Then you will go boating, so just pick another color there. So that's going to be my Q. So just a different topic altogether. So if it is sunny this weekend, now if you look at your sentences, it matches up with the beginning of this one. So it's really pairing up the same beginnings, and then it has a different conclusion. So we're going to say that that's the R. But if you notice, it's not the end of the first one pairing up with the beginning of the next one. So because it's not laid out in that specific order, it doesn't matter what the words are. We're just matching up the different topics that they're talking about in the subjects. So we cannot make a valid conclusion. And number 11, now I want you to do this one yourself and see if you can come up with a valid conclusion and what that will be. All right, so if it snows, that would be our hypothesis. School will be canceled. There's our conclusion. Again, they're talking about school being canceled. So that's going to stay the same. And then students will need to make up a day of school. That's a completely different topic altogether. So this one, you can make a valid conclusion because the end of the first, the beginning of the second do match up. So we can make our valid conclusion of if it snows, then students will need to make up a day of school. Now remember, don't focus so much on what the words are saying. Just look at it enough, read it enough so you can pick out what the topics are to pair up how your sentence is set up. The structure of your sentence is really what you want to pay attention to.